Instructor Vess Kolaan had run the Attrition Protocol for 60 years. He had broken 11 species. He knew the shape of it. The refusals on day 4. The withdrawals on day 9. The quiet, dignified surrender that always arrived before day 14. On day 31, he stood at the observation glass and read the human cohort's formal request out loud, because he did not trust his own eyes. They are asking for more. Dr. Sarah Whitlock checked the file again. That is correct. They want the difficulty raised. Yes. All of them signed it? All 38. Kolaan set the tablet down very carefully, the way a person sets down something they are afraid to drop. Doctor, the protocol does not have a setting above this one. Here is what neither of them said out loud, because saying it would make it real. Every species the coalition had ever tested got worse under pressure. Slower, weaker, sloppier. That was not an opinion. That was the law the entire assessment system was built on. You applied hardship, you watched the curve fall, and where it hit bottom was your rating. 11 species, 60 years. The curve had never once gone the other way. Whitlock had pulled the human performance curve that morning. It was going up. And if the curve went up, then the protocol had never been measuring strength at all. It had been measuring where a species stopped, which meant every rating the coalition had ever issued, every world it had cleared, every species it had quietly written off as unfit, was based on a question humans had just refused to answer. 30 days earlier, the coalition had been very sure how this would end. This is how they found out they were wrong. Hesperine Station had a smell the humans noticed before anything else. Burnt mineral, cold metal, something underneath it that none of them could name. Nadia Oyalaran noticed it, and thought about a shipyard she had worked in for 6 years outside Lagos, where the air tasted like scorched iron every day of her life, and she had gone home every night, and eaten dinner and slept fine. She did not say this out loud. She was the only one in cohort 12 who had never worn a uniform, and she had already learned that the others were watching to see how long she lasted. 38 of them stood in the intake hall. White ceramic walls. No chairs. Instructor Vess Kolaan entered and did not greet them. You have been told this is training, he said. It is not training. Training assumes you will improve. This is assessment. The Attrition Protocol applies escalating environmental hardship until performance collapses. The point of collapse is your species rating. That rating determines your standing in coalition space for the next 400 years. Tomas Ray shifted his weight. Nadia watched him do it. I want to be precise, Kolaan continued, because precision is a courtesy. 11 species have completed this protocol. All 11 collapsed. The protocol has no pass condition. There is only the question of where you stop. Someone near the back asked what the average was. Kolaan answered without hesitation, which Nadia would remember later, because it meant he had never once considered the number might be wrong. Day 9. The first cycle began 4 hours after that. Corridor 7 ran 2 kilometers under variable gravity, cycling between 1.4 and 2.1 standard, with pressure drops at intervals none of them could predict. 18 hours. No stopping. The protocol did not require them to finish. It required them to continue until they could not. Tomas went out hard. He was the fittest man in the cohort, and he knew it, and he had spent 9 years in infantry learning that the correct response to a hard thing is to hit it harder than it hits you. He took the first 4 kilometers at a pace that made 2 other recruits try to match him. Nadia let him go. She found the pace she used on a long hull seam. Not fast. Repeatable. She counted her breathing against her steps the way she counted it against a torch pole, and when the gravity spiked she did not fight it, she let her knees take it and kept moving. At hour 6 Tomas was walking. At hour 11 he was leaning on the wall every 400 meters and pretending he was checking his boots. At hour 18, 29 recruits were still moving. Nadia was one of them. So was Tomas. Barely, and the look he gave her when he saw her still upright was not gratitude. In the observation gallery, Kolaan logged the number and thought nothing of it. Day 1 attrition was always low. The protocol did not begin working until the body understood that tomorrow would be worse. It was worse. Cycle 2 added cold. Cycle 3 added noise at a frequency that made the sinuses ache and sleep almost impossible. Cycle 4 removed the lights. By day 6, 6 recruits had withdrawn. That was normal. Kolaan noted it as normal. By day 9, the coalition average, 4 more were gone. 28 remain. Kolaan checked the figure twice and felt the first small rawness, The way you feel a floor that is not quite level before you consciously notice it. 28 was high. Not impossible. Some species front-loaded their endurance and cratered later. He wrote anomalous distribution, expect steep decline in the log, and closed it. He would reread that sentence many times in the following weeks. Here is what Kolaan could not see from the gallery. Every night, in a bunk room that was too cold and too loud to properly rest in, 38, and then 32, and then 28 human beings lay down and lost consciousness for 4 to 6 hours. And every morning they got up better at it. Not recovered. Nobody was recovered. They were bruised and hollow-eyed, and some of them were bleeding from the ears. But the corridor that had taken 18 hours on day 1 took 16 on day 4, and 15 on day 7, and the humans did not comment on this because to them it was the least remarkable fact in the universe. You do a hard thing. You sleep. The next day the hard thing is slightly less hard. That is simply what happens. No coalition species did this. Not one. In 11 species and 60 years, hardship Pradu. Dr. Sarah Whitlock found the first real anomaly on day 11, and she did not report it, because she assumed she had made an error. The corridor times were not flattening. They were not holding. She ran the curve 3 times against 3 separate sensor sets and got the same shape every time, and the shape was wrong in a way she did not have language for. She sat with it for a long moment in a white ceramic office at the top of a station built to break people. Then she pulled up Kolaan's log entry from day 9. Anomalous distribution, expect steep decline. Whitlock looked at the graph on her screen. It was not declining. She deleted the file and ran it again from scratch because there had to be a mistake. There was not. Whitlock ran the numbers a 4th time on day 12, using a sensor array she had personally calibrated that morning, because she had reached the point where she trusted nothing she had not touched with her own hands. The curve went up. Not dramatically. Nothing about it was traumatic, and that was the part that unsettled her most. A dramatic result would have been equipment failure, or contamination, or sabotage, and any of those would have been a relief. What she had instead was a slow, patient, almost boring upward line. The kind of line you get when something is simply working. Corridor 7. Day 1, 18 hours, 29 finishers. Day 12, 13 hours, 40, 26 finishers. 2 fewer recruits. 4 hours faster. She pulled the individual traces and laid them over each other, and the pattern held at every level she looked. Not one recruit improving while the rest degraded. All of them, together, at different rates, in different amounts, but every single trace bent the same direction. Whitlock had spent 19 years in coalition xenophysiology. She had watched 4 species run this protocol. She knew what a species performance curve looks like under sustained hardship, and it looked like a stone falling. She sat back in the white ceramic chair and said out loud to an empty office, "That is not possible." Down in the bunk room, nobody was thinking about curves. Nadia was thinking about her hands. She checked them every night. Old habit, 14 years deep. You look at your hands at the end of a shift because your hands tell you what your body has actually been doing, as opposed to what you think it has been doing. Split knuckles meant you were gripping wrong. Numbness meant you had held one position too long. Tremor meant you had gone past the point where your work would be any good, and it was time to stop, because bad welds killed people 6 months later in ways nobody ever traced back to you. Her hands were bruised across the backs. Torn nail on the left index. Steady. She flexed them once, lay down, and was asleep in under 2 minutes. Across the room, Tomas Reyes was away. He had been awake for most of 3 nights. Not because he could not sleep, because he had decided not to. The noise cycle made rest shallow and broken, and Tomas had worked out, in the way exhausted people work things out at 3 in the morning, that if sleep was going to be low quality anyway, the hours were better spent recovering actively. Stretching, rehydrating, running tomorrow's corridor in his head, so his body would already know the route. That was what 9 years of infantry had taught him. You do not lie down in front of a problem. You get up earlier than it does. He watched Nadia sleep with an expression he would have been ashamed to have described back to him. She had never worn a uniform, never carried a weapon. She had spent her adult life welding seams inside a hull, which as far as Tomas could tell was a job you took because you did not want a harder one. And she was beating him. Kolaan summoned Whitlock to the gallery on day 14. "Your data submission is late," he said, not unkindly. Kolaan was rarely unkind. "I assume there is a reason." "There is a reason." "Is the reason equipment failure?" "No." "Calibration error?" No. Kolaan turned from the glass and looked at her fully, which he did not often do. Then I would like the reason. Whitlock put the tablet in his hand. 4 years working under him had taught her that Kolaan needed to see a thing himself before he would accept that anyone had seen it. He looked at the graph for 11 seconds. This is inverted. It is not. You have plotted the axis inverted. I have not. Doctor. His voice did not rise. It never rose. But something underneath it went very careful. This shows the cohort performing better on day 12 than on day 1. Yes. Under escalating hardship. Yes. After 26% attrition. Yes. Kolaan set the tablet down on the console. He set it down with both hands. Very slowly, the way a person sets down something they are afraid to drop. Then he did not take his hands off it. Run it again. I have run it 4 times. Run it a 5th. Instructor. Run it a 5th time, Dr. Whitlock, and use a different array. Because if that graph is accurate, then I have been administering an assessment protocol incorrectly for 60 years, and I would like to exhaust every other explanation before I entertain that one. She ran it a 5th time. Here is what neither of them said out loud, because the protocol had no field for it. The Attrition Protocol did not measure strength. It had never claimed to. Kolaan had said so on day 1, plainly, in a white room, to 38 people who were not listening closely enough to hear what he was admitting. The point of collapse is your species rating. It measured where you stopped. That was its entire function. And it had worked beautifully for 60 years across 11 species, because every one of those species had a stopping point that arrived on a schedule you could set a clock by. It had never encountered a species that got better on the way down. And if a species did that, the protocol would keep escalating. And escalating. And the number it eventually produced would not be a measurement of that species at all. It would be a measurement of how much hardship the coalition was willing to apply before someone in an office decided the exercise had become unseemly. Whitlock understood that on day 14. Kolaan understood it too, and it is to his enormous credit that what he felt was not excitement, and not fear for his career, but a slow cold horror on behalf of 11 species who had been rated by a machine that was measuring the wrong thing. He did not say that yet either. On day 16, the protocol removed the sleep cycle. It arrived without ceremony, one of 40 preloaded escalation stages scheduled 60 years ago by people long dead. The bunk room lights came up at hour 4 and did not go down again. Nadia woke, understood immediately, and felt something she had not felt since day 1. Fear. Not of the corridor. She could walk the corridor. But she had spent 14 years learning exactly one thing about hard work, and it was this: the work does not build you. The work breaks you down. Sleep is where you get built. Every welder she had ever known who went bad the same way, chasing overtime, skipping rest, and one morning their hands were not steady anymore and they never came back. The protocol had just taken away the part where they got better. Tomas laughed when the lights stayed on. It was not a good laugh. Now you're all where I've been, he said. Nadia looked at him properly for the first time in a week. Really looked. The hollow under the eyes. The gray cast. The tremor in the left hand he was holding against his thigh to hide. He thought he had been ahead of them. He had been 11 days into the thing that was about to start happening to everyone. In a gallery, Whitlock watched the lights come up on 26 people and felt her stomach drop, because she had run the traces 5 times and she knew exactly what the curve was built on. The protocol had escalated blindly for 60 years. And on the 16th try, without knowing it, without meaning to, it had finally aimed at the one thing that would work. She reached for the calm to tell Kolaan. Then she stopped, because she realized she did not know whose side she would be on when she did. By hour 60 without sleep, the cohort had stopped talking. Not out of discipline. Out of arithmetic. Speech cost something, and every one of them had begun, without discussing it, running the same private ledger. This much for the corridor. This much for standing up. This much for keeping your eyes tracking. Words came out of the same account, and the account was overdrawn. Nadia walked corridor 7 on the 3rd sleepless day in 19 hours and 40 minutes. Day 1 had been 18. She had gone backwards. For the first time since Hesperine, she had gone backwards, and she knew it before the timer told her, because she had felt her right knee start taking the gravity spikes wrong at kilometer 11 and she had not been able to correct it. In the gallery, Kolaan watched the number post and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "There it is." Whitlock did not answer. Doctor, there it is. The decline. 16 days late, but the shape is correct. He was not gloating. There was something almost like relief in it, the relief of a man whose floor has stopped feeling uneven. Log it as onset of terminal degradation. Projected collapse within 6 days. Whitlock looked at the same number and saw something completely different, and this was the moment she'd understood that she and Kolaan had not been reading the same graph for a week. She saw a species that had been robbed of the mechanism that made it work, and was still, 3 days in, only 90 minutes off its opening performance. She did not log anything. Tomas' rays went down on day 19. It happened at kilometer 14 in a 2.1 gravity band, and it did not look like collapse. That was what disturbed the recruits nearest him. He did not stagger or clutch anything. He simply stopped walking, the way a machine stops when the power goes, and stood perfectly still in the middle of the corridor with his eyes open and his hands at his sides. Nadia reached him first. Tomas. He looked at her. She was not certain he saw her. I'm fine, he said. I'm just going to stand here. You can't stand here. I'm going to stand here for a second and then I'll catch up. She had heard this exact sentence before, twice, both times from men in a shipyard, and one of them had been dead within the hour and the other had lost an arm below the elbow, and both times the man had said it in that same flat, reasonable voice, and both times the man had been standing next to something that was about to fail. The tell was not the words. The tell was that he thought the sentence made sense. Tomas, how many days since you slept properly? We haven't slept in 3 days. Not the cohort. You worked on that. It took him a while, and watching him do it, watching a 29-year-old infantryman visibly rebuild a piece of arithmetic that a child could do, was the worst thing Nadia had seen since she arrived. 14, he said. Maybe. She got under his arm. He did not resist, which frightened her more than anything else, because Tomas Reyes had spent 19 days making absolutely certain that no one carried him. She got him 400 meters. Then 2 other recruits took over, and they got him another 600, and by the time they reached the checkpoint there were 5 people involved and none of them had finished their own run. The protocol counted all 5 as incomplete. Whitlock watched the incompletes post and understood that she was looking at the second half of the mechanism, the half she had not had a name for until that moment. It was not just sleep. Sleep was how an individual human converted damage into capability, but there was something else running underneath the cohort curve, something she had been reading as noise for 2 weeks, and it was this. Humans distributed the load. Not efficiently. Not optimally. 5 people had just wrecked their own scores to move one man who was, by any coalition measure, already a write-off. That was catastrophic behavior. Every species she had studied triaged under attrition. You shed the failing member, because carrying them cost more than they return. Humans did the arithmetic and then ignored the answer. And the aggregate curve went up, because a cohort that knows nobody gets left behind will spend more of itself than a cohort that knows they might be the one abandoned. Whitlock wrote 3 lines of notes and then deleted them, because she had just realized what would happen if she submitted them. Kolaan came to find her at the end of day 19. You have not filed in 5 days. No. The protocol requires daily physiological assessment. It is not optional. It is not a courtesy I extend to you. I know what it requires. Then file. Whitlock stood up. She was a head shorter than him and she did not particularly care. Instructor, if I file, what happens? The assessment continues to its conclusion. No. Be specific. If I file a report that says the human decline has begun, what does the protocol do? Kolaan was quiet. It escalates, she said, because that is what it does when it detects the onset of collapse. It escalates to confirm the collapse. Stage 17, then 18, then 19, until the curve bottoms out and it can print a number. That is the procedure, yes. They will die. Some species have sustained fatalities during the protocol. It is not the intended outcome. It has never invalidated a rating. And there it was. Whitlock heard it land in the room like something dropped on ceramic. It has never invalidated a rating. Not we stop when they die. Not fatality triggers review. The protocol had a category for human deaths and that category was acceptable variance. 60 years, she said quietly. How many? That information is not held at station level. How many, instructor? I said it is not held at station level. He turned toward the glass and his voice, for the only time she ever heard it was not steady. I have asked 4 times. In 60 years. The request is logged and returned marked as satisfied without an attached figure. Whitlock stared at the back of his head. He had asked 4 times, and been refused 4 times, and continued to run the protocol anyway, because he had believed the thing every competent person inside a bad system believes, which is that the system would not be permitted to exist if it were wrong. She found Nadia at hour 81, in a corridor outside the medical bay where Tomas was on fluids and monitors. Whitlock had a tablet in her hand. She was aware, with total clarity, that carrying it out of her office had ended her career, and that she had made that decision somewhere around the word variance and had simply not informed herself until now. You need to see something, she said. Nadia looked at her with eyes that had been open for 81 hours. Your staff? Yes. Coalition pays you? Yes. Then why are you down here? Whitlock turned the tablet around. It was the curve. 19 days of it. The long confident climb, and then the cliff at day 16 where the light stopped going down. Because in 3 days they are going to escalate again, she said, and you are the only people in coalition space who can see what this graph actually says. It says you were getting stronger. It says they took the reason away. And it says that when they take it further, the protocol will record whatever happens to you as a measurement instead of a killing. Nadia looked at the graph for a long time. Then she said the first thing she had said in 6 hours, and her voice came out cracked and quiet and absolutely level. Show me the escalation schedule. The escalation schedule was 40 stages long, and no human being had ever been shown it. Nadia read it in a supply alcove at hour 84, hunched over Whitlock's tablet with 2 other recruits breathing over her shoulder. What struck her was not the cruelty. It was the tidiness. Every stage had a designation, a duration, a physiological target, and a projected attrition percentage, laid out in neat columns by someone who had never met a single person those columns applied to. Stage 16, the one they were living in, was listed as recovery interdiction. Stage 17 was recovery interdiction, sustain. Stage 18 introduced thermal load. 19 combined it with the gravity bands. Stage 22 projected 61% attrition. Past stage 26, the projection column simply read N/A. Why is it blank? Said the recruit at her shoulder, a former dockhand from Ceres named Petra Vance. Because nobody's ever been alive there, Nadia said. She scrolled back to the header line. She had skipped it the first time, the way you skip the sentence that explains everything, because it is set in the least interesting font on the page. Protocol terminates on cohort performance collapse, cohort withdrawal, or cohort expiry. 3 exits. 2 meant losing, 1 meant dying. Nadia read it 4 times. There was no 4th condition. Nowhere did it say terminates when the assessed species demonstrates sufficient capability, because the protocol had never been built to detect capability. It had been built to find a flaw. And Nadia Oyalaran, who had spent 14 years reading structural drawings for the failure the designer had not thought about, sat in a supply alcove on a station built to break people and found the gap. If the protocol only stopped when you collapsed, withdrew, or died, then it had no procedure whatsoever for a cohort that did none of those things. None. Not a fallback. Not an escalation cap. Nothing. It would simply keep going. And every stage it climbed, it would document, in its own tidy columns, exactly how far a species could be pushed before the people applying the pressure lost their nerve. Which meant the number at the end had never measured the species at all. It had always measured the coalition. Assessor Prime Ithun arrived on day 21. The shuttle docked without announcement. Whitlock's 5-day data gap had tripped an automated audit on day 20, and the response had taken 19 hours, which told Kolaan precisely how seriously it was being treated. Ithun did not go to the gallery. Ithun went straight to Kalaan's office and stood in the center of it, perfectly upright, hands empty at both sides. Instructor Kolaan. Assessor Prime. The physiological record contains a 5-day gap. It has been attributed to your medical officer. It has not been attributed to you. The responsibility is mine. That is noted, and it is inaccurate, and the distinction will be preserved in the record. Ithun's voice was even, unhurried, faultlessly polite. Kolaan found he had to work to keep listening to it. A replacement dataset has been reconstructed from raw sensor output. It has been reviewed. Then you have seen the curve. An anomalous curve has been logged. Assessor Prime. You have seen the curve. An anomalous result has been logged as anomalous. The amber eyes did not blink. The protocol is a validated instrument across 11 species and 60 years. A result contradicting a validated instrument is, by definition, a fault in the reading, not in the instrument. The rating will be issued on the basis of the corrected model. Kolaan stood very still. He had spent 60 years inside this institution. He had heard that construction thousands of times. He had used it himself, in rooms exactly like this one, to people who deserved better. And he had never once, until this moment, heard it from the outside. "You have not asked me what the corrected model produces," he said. "The output is not relevant to the validity of the method. Humor me. The corrected model produces a collapse point at day 9. Kolaan laughed. It was one short sound and he was as surprised by it as Ithun was. "Day 9, he said. "The coalition average." "Correct. You reconstructed a dataset from 21 days of sensor output, and it returned the exact figure the protocol expected on day 1. That is consistent with a validated instrument. That is consistent with a model that was told what to find." Ithun did not react. That was the worst part. There was no flare of anger to push against, no defensiveness to exploit, just a smooth pale wall of procedure that had been polished by 6 decades of never being wrong, because it had never permitted itself to be measured. "Escalation to stage 17 will proceed at 0600, Ithun said. "They have not slept in 5 days. Recovery interdiction, sustained, is the scheduled stage. 26 people, Assessor Prime. Sustained interdiction will kill some of them. Fatalities during assessment have not previously invalidated a rating." And there it was again. Passive. Weightless. A sentence with no author, describing deaths with no owner. Kolaan looked at this creature of his own species, who had never run a cohort, never stood at the glass at hour 80, never watched a recruit put an arm under someone who was already written off. "Say it in the active voice," Kolaan said. "I do not understand the request. Say I am ordering an escalation that I expect to kill people. Say it as yourself, not as the protocol." Ithun's hands remained empty and still at both sides. "Escalation to stage 17 will proceed at 0600, Ithun said. Whitlock brought Nadia the news at hour 96. She did not have to explain it. Nadia was already sitting with the tablet on her knees and she had been sitting with it for 2 hours, and when Whitlock came around the corner Nadia said, without looking up, "There's no stop condition." "I know. It ends when we break, when we quit, or when we're dead. That's the whole list." She finally raised her head, and her eyes were red-rimmed and absolutely clear. "Doctor, what happens if we do none of those things?" "The protocol has no procedure for that." "I know it doesn't. I'm asking what happens." Whitlock opened her mouth and found she had no answer, because she had been trained by an institution that had also never asked the question. "It keeps escalating," she said slowly. "And every stage it climbs, it has to be authorized. By a person. With a name on it." Nadia nodded once, like a welder confirming a measurement. "Then it's not a test," she said. "It's a bluff. And nobody's ever called it." They wrote it in a bunk room at hour 99, on the back of a ration manifest, because none of them had access to a terminal that would submit anything to coalition record. It was 4 lines long. Nadia wrote it and then read it aloud twice, so that everyone understood exactly what they were signing. 25 of them signed it in the room. Petra Vance carried it to the medical bay for the 26th. Tomas Reyes had been on fluids for 2 days. He was lucid, barely, and he read the 4 lines 3 times before he understood them, and when he did he made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You realize," he said, "they'll give it to us." "Yeah. I nearly died doing this at the current setting." "I know." Tomas looked at the manifest for a long moment. Then he took the stylus in a hand that would not stop shaking, and signed his name so badly it had to be countersigned to be legible. "Good," he said. "Then it doesn't get to say I stopped." The petition reached Kolaan's desk at 0400 on day 22, 2 hours before the escalation. He read it standing up. Then he read it again sitting down. Then he carried it to the observation glass, where Dr. Sarah Whitlock was already waiting, because she had known before he did what was written on it. And Instructor Vess Kolaan, 60 years and 11 broken species, held a ration manifest in 4 long tapered fingers and read the human cohort's formal request out loud, because he did not trust his own eyes. "They are asking for more. They want the difficulty raised," Whitlock said. "All of them signed it?" All 26. Kolaan set the manifest down on the console with both hands, very slowly, and did not take his hands off it. Doctor, the protocol does not have a setting above stage 40. They know. They cannot know. The schedule is not released to cohorts. Whitlock said nothing at all, and after a moment Kolaan turned and looked at her, and understood, and did not say the thing he could have said, which would have ended her career in one sentence. How far did they read? All of it. Including the termination conditions. Especially those. Kolaan looked back at the manifest. 4 lines in a shaky human hand, 26 signatures, one of them countersigned because the man who wrote it could not hold a stylus. Then they know it does not stop, he said. They know it only stops 3 ways. And they have declined all 3. Ithun arrived at 0540, 20 minutes ahead of the escalation. The submission has been received. It has been categorized as non-responsive to the assessment, and will not be entered into the record. It is a formal request from the assessed population, Kolaan said. The assessed population does not have standing to modify assessment parameters. It does not modify anything. It requests. Kolaan lifted the manifest. Assessor Prime, in 60 years, has a cohort ever submitted anything to this station? That information is not held at station level. Has any species, at any point in the operational history of the Attrition Protocol, asked for an escalation? A pause. Very small. The first one Kolaan had ever heard from it. No. Then it is not non-responsive. It is the single most responsive thing that has ever happened here. He set the manifest down. 26 people who have not slept in 5 days read a document they were never meant to see, understood that it has no exit that does not end in their defeat or their deaths, and their reply was go on then. That is data. That is the only real data this station has ever generated. Escalation to stage 17 will proceed at 0600. Yes, Kolaan said. I know it will, because you cannot stop it either. Ithun's amber eyes did not blink. That statement is not accurate. Then stop it. The protocol proceeds according to schedule. You are the Assessor Prime. You have the authority. Stop it. Kolaan stepped closer, 60 service bands catching the cream light. Not for them. For yourself. Prove to me that there is a person inside the procedure who can choose. Stop the escalation and I will never raise any of this again. The silence went on for 4 full seconds. Escalation to stage 17 will proceed at 0600, Ithun said. Kolaan nodded slowly. Something in his face settled, and it was not defeat. Thank you, he said. That was the measurement I needed. Stage 17 ran for 9 days. The record of those 9 days is thin, because Whitlock stopped filing entirely and Kolaan did not compel her, and what exists comes mostly from raw sensor traces and, later, from the recruits themselves. What the traces show is this. The curve did not go up. Nobody has ever claimed it did. Sustained recovery interdiction did exactly what it was designed to do, and the cohort performance line bent downward across 9 days in the shape the protocol had been predicting for 6 decades. And it did not reach the floor. It descended, and flattened, and descended again, and flattened again, and at no point in 9 days did 26 human beings produce the vertical collapse that 11 species before them had produced inside of 14. They got slower. They got weaker. 2 more withdrew and were removed to medical. 24 kept walking. On day 28, at hour 281 without sleep, Nadia Oyelaran finished Corridor 7 in 22 hours and 11 minutes, which was 4 hours worse than her opening run and the single most important number in the history of the Attrition Protocol, because the protocol's own model had projected her expiry 6 days earlier. She checked her hands at the finish line. She always did. They were shaking so badly she could not close them. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she flexed them anyway, and got up and walked to the start of the corridor to wait for the one still behind her. The protocol was suspended on day 31 by an authority that was never named in the order. Ithun issued the rating as scheduled. It was a low rating. It cited a collapse point of day 9, drawn from the corrected model, and it entered coalition record as the official assessment of the human species, and it is still there. Nobody uses it. That was the thing Kolaan understood on the day the order came through, standing at the observation glass with a suspension notice in one hand and a ration manifest in the other. A rating is not a fact. It is a claim that an instrument was working. And the instrument had spent 31 days in front of witnesses failing to do the one thing it existed to do, and every species in coalition space now knew it. 11 ratings, 60 years. Every one of them produced by a machine that had just been proven to measure where a species stopped rather than what a species could do. 2 of those species filed for reassessment within the year. By the 4th year it was 9. Kolaan found Nadia in the medical bay on day 33, 40 hours after the cohort had finally been allowed to sleep. She looked better, not good, better. Instructor. I am no longer an instructor. The protocol has no further use for administrators. He sat down slowly in a chair not built for his frame. I wish to ask you something. It is not official. There is nothing left that is official. Go ahead. Why did you ask for more? Nadia was quiet for a while. Because you weren't measuring us, she said. You were measuring how far you'd go. Kolaan closed his eyes. We read the exit conditions, she went on. Break, quit, or die. That's a test where the only way out is to lose. So there was no version where we gave you a real number by playing along. The only way to get an honest reading out of that machine was to make somebody put their name on the next escalation. And if we had escalated? Again and again? Then you'd have printed the number. She looked at him steadily. And did it have had your name on it, not ours? Kolaan sat with that for a long moment. 60 years, he said. 11 species. I asked 4 times how many had died and I was refused 4 times, and I kept running it, because I believed the thing that was wrong could not be permitted to continue. Yeah. Nadia's voice was not unkind. That's the same mistake, though, isn't it? Which mistake? Waiting for somebody else's stop condition. Tomas Reyes walked out of Hesperine Station under his own power on day 39, which the medical staff described in their notes as unexpected. He stopped at the airlock next to Nadia and looked back down the white ceramic corridor for a while. It nearly killed me, he said. I know. 14 days without sleep. I was so far gone I couldn't count to 14. He shook his head slowly. And here's the part I can't put down. It still wasn't the right measurement. I gave that machine everything I had and it wrote down day 9. It wrote down what it was built to find. Yeah. Tomas laughed, and this time it was a good laugh, cracked and tired and real. Well, it found something. He walked out. Behind him, in an office at the top of a station built to break people, a suspension notice sat on a desk beside a ration manifest with 26 signatures on it, one of them so badly written it had to be countersigned to be read. That one is the only part anybody quotes now.